Veterinary medicine is a messy business both physically and emotionally. Vetsplaining is one veterinarian's attempt to explain and understand her own profession a little better. Join Dr. Lisa McFaddin as she delves deep into the medical and business aspects of veterinary medicine.
All right, I'm going to call this the Bah Humbug edition because we are going to talk about common items around the holidays that can be potentially toxic or dangerous for your pets. So we're going to start with food items. So the big four are garlic, onions, grapes, and raisins. And onion powder is one of those things that we have to be very careful with because even small quantities can be toxic and potentially cause pretty severe anemia. When I was a vet student, we had a dog hospitalized for what's called hemolytic anemia. So basically, the body's red blood cells start to break open and the animal becomes anemic very quickly because the dog ingested about a third of a bottle of onion powder that had fallen on the floor while the owner was making some sort of dish. Another food that we need to think about that we don't commonly think about are macadamia nuts. So those fancy nut trays you may give as gifts or receive as gifts, those can be toxic. Chocolate is a big one that most people know about, and it's dark chocolate. So the higher the concentration of theobromine, which is one of the main ingredients, and caffeine, the more toxic it is. So the darker it is, the more toxic it is. Baker's chocolate being the most toxic. And when I used to practice in Chicago, See's Candy was really big, and they make these amazing dark chocolate covered mints. And every year, without fail, around the holidays, we would see at least one dog, usually multiple, frequently beagles, owning a beagle, I know how naughty they can be, that had ingested generally the entire container of See's Candy. And we would make them vomit. And the really sad part is it would smell so good because it smelled exactly like mint chocolate. So then you had to kind of like battle this internal struggle of, do I go get some mint chocolate now? Or should I be grossed out because I just made the dog vomit it? Bread dough is something else that people don't frequently think about. It causes two problems. One, if it's ingested, so we're talking about actually ingesting the dough. So generally while you're waiting for the bread to rise, it can ferment in the stomach and basically get them drunk. It can also cause a food bloat because it continues to rise and distend in the stomach. Alcohol, speaking of bread dough, converting into alcohol, is another thing we need to be careful about with our pets because they are not meant to drink alcohol and they cannot handle it well, and it can make them very, very sick. We also need to be careful about high-fat foods, especially in our dogs, because as we talked about in the podcast before Thanksgiving, pancreatitis is a potential sequela or outcome of ingestion of a high-fatty meal. Next, we need to think about the plants that we get around the holiday season. Ingestion of most of these plants causes GI upset, so vomiting, diarrhea, decreased appetite, general malaise, which is like my favorite clinical sign ever because I feel like he has to be related to Captain Don't Feel Good. So common toxic plants include mistletoe, holly, poinsettias. Lilies are another potential. Those are very toxic to cats and can cause potentially fatal kidney failure if enough is ingested, and all parts of the lily are toxic. Next, we need to think about our decorations. So this one I actually was unaware of, but I always see snow globes listed as a potential toxin / hazard for dogs around and cats around the holiday season. And I assumed it was just because cats are sometimes kind of jerks and will bat it off the counter, and then you have broken glass and they can injure themselves. But it's actually because some snow globes that are made overseas, the liquid that's inside can actually contain antifreeze, and antifreeze is extremely toxic for both cats and dogs. And unfortunately, antifreeze is inherently sweet, which is why they like to eat it. And then it can cause, depending on how much they ingest and the length of time from ingestion, it can cause anything from neurologic signs to kidney disease, and it can be fatal. Other things that we decorate with are tinsel. That's a really big one for cats because cats are weird and they like to nom on things that are not edible but are floofy. So think tinsel, think like the fake grass you put in your Easter basket. And ingestion of tinsel can cause an obstruction in the intestinal tract, which may require surgery. And depending on how much of the tinsel is ingested, it's the same kind of idea of cats eat string or dental floss. what'll happen is that one end of the tinsel will get stuck in a portion of the intestine, and then the rest of it will keep moving through because the gut's trying to get it out, right? Because the gut really should only move in one direction. And it's stuck at one spot, trying to move through the back end, and it can create like this sawing type movement and can actually put a hole in the small intestine, which you always want to keep your small intestine contents in your small intestine. You do not want them in the body, so you can have a perforation or a hole that is created because of that like sawing action. In theory, any foreign body that is ingested, right? So anything that they shouldn't have eaten that they ate that gets lodged in the intestines can potentially perforate the intestines if it sits there long enough and there's enough pressure. And if it's really sharp, like dogs who swallow needles or cats who swallow needles. But if it is a string, that's when you can get that sawing action and you can get perforations in multiple areas. And in that case, depending on how much it is, you may, because most of the time if there's a perforation, you actually have to like remove a segment of bowel. And in that case, you may have to remove like a lot of bowel. So either don't have tinsel if you have cats, or keep your cats away from the tinsel. Speaking of ingesting sharp things, glass ornaments or really thin plastic ornaments, if they're ingested by dogs, can potentially be problematic when they eat them. A lot of times you can we call it bulking it through. So you feed them like really gluten-y bread that just kind of like binds to the sharp edges that hopefully allows them to pass it. But there is always a chance that it could get stuck or cause a perforation. Christmas tree lights. Some cats and dogs are very curious and confused by the lights and the string, and they like to chew on it. And if it is plugged in, that can be a problem, and you can have electrocution of your animals. When I was an intern, and my beagle was, I think he was less than a year old at that point, and he was still being crate trained, and we had his crate next to our bed. And my husband, I was on overnight, so my husband went to plug in his cell phone and realized, like, he put the portion of the charger into his phone, but there was no juice going to it. And so he pulled on the cord, and half of the cord came out, and the other half of the cord was attached to the plug into the wall. So then Winston got to come to the emergency clinic, and he was fine. And I think that when he chewed on it, like he got to it through the crate because he was bitter that he was in the crate, and he chewed on it. And even though it was plugged in, there was no current going because it wasn't plugged into my husband's phone at the time. But we took an x-ray, and it was like copper wire that was in the cell phone cord, and there was just like little pieces of copper throughout his entire intestinal tract. So we basically just had to monitor him to make sure he defecated all of that out and then repeat the x-rays, and he was fine. But moral of the story, animals, even when you don't think they will, may chew on electrical cords, especially if there's bright lights attached to them. Oh, and going back to the plants, one major plant that I obviously forgot is the Christmas tree. So live Christmas trees, especially cats that may chew on it, it can cause GI upset. If they drink the water that's in the bottom of the tree stand, that can cause stomach upset. And cats, the first time that they see a Christmas tree, usually like to climb it because it's like they have this, whoa, I'm outside, I want to climb that tree. And so you can get injury because of rough areas of the tree, whether it's fake or real. You can also get cats covered in sap, depending on how much sap was on the tree, and that can be problematic because the sap can be irritating, as in part because it can mat the fur. Also, it can kind of like keep in the oils excreted by the tree, and that pine tree oil can be very irritating to the skin. Plus, then they like become like a decorator crab because they have all this sap on them, and then they inevitably like run around your house and all this other stuff attaches to them, and then you have to shave them. Another thing to think about are the fragrances that you have around this time of year. So certain animals can be very sensitive to like plug-ins or candles or incense or spray fresheners or even the smell of the Christmas tree. So if you have a cat or dog that, you put up your decorations or you start lighting candles and they start obsessively sneezing, or they seem snuffly or congested, or they're coughing, that may be an indication that the scent is too much for their system and they can't handle it. You also need to be careful, obviously, with lit candles, because one, you don't want to leave them unattended and have your house burned down. But two, especially kittens, they're like, fire. And they like to stick their face right up next to the wick that is on fire, and then they will frequently singe off all the whiskers around their face and on their eyebrows, and they can actually really injure themselves. Again, when I was an intern, and we had this kitten that we rescued, and we had a candle burning, and it was like up really high. We didn't think she was going to get to it, and then all of a sudden we heard this meow, and then she came running towards us, and like all of the whiskers on the right half of her face were gone. She was fine. Like, luckily it just singed the whiskers and it didn't hurt her, but they never really fully grew back, and like just one Fu Manchu looking eyebrow whisker grew back, and then the rest just, never came back. If you want more information about a lot of these things that we talked about, you can go to the ASPCA Poison Control online. They have a lot of information and safety tips for pets around the holiday season. So then the last thing I want to talk about are gifts for your pets, because everybody likes to get them things around the holiday, whether it's something little like a treat or a toy. It's just sometimes, while they may look good intention, they are not necessarily the best thing for your pet. So you just need to make sure that the toy you're getting is of adequate size and they can't like break off a piece, have that get stuck. Things like rawhides you need to be careful with, because sometimes they can gulp them, like make them kind of chew on them, get them a little squishy, gulp them, and those can get lodged or stuck in the throat or in the stomach. And a lot of dogs can't tolerate rawhide, so it can make them vomit. Any treat that your dog's never had before, you want to make sure that you introduce it in small amounts so that they do not get an upset stomach from it. You also need to be careful about things like elk antler or the smoked bones. Dogs like to chew on bones. That's part of how they keep their teeth healthy. It's just innate within them, but you have to keep in mind that there is a risk, and you have to weigh the pros and cons of your dog enjoying the chewing versus knowing that they could potentially cause what's called a slab fracture. So if they chomp at the right angle and the right force, it can cause one of those big, we call them carnasial, so those cheek or shearing teeth can break, and then they have to have a dental surgical procedure to have the tooth removed, or if you go to a veterinary dentist, to have basically a root canal and then a crown put on. So just think about, like, how much do you want them to chew? Do you like $2,000 want it? Because that's usually the going rate for a root canal and a full dental procedure. So just keep that in mind. Things like sweaters. I am all for animals in sweaters and clothes. I think it's adorable, but not every animal likes it, and you really don't want to stress them out. Holidays are stressful in general just because there's weird things on the wall. There's this giant tree that normally is outside in the house. There's all these lights that are never there. There's all these smells. There's all these people. So we just have to keep in mind that the holidays can be stressful, as we know, for humans, but also for pets. And so if it seems like your pet is getting overly stressed during the holiday season, talk to your veterinarian, because there are some natural calming supplements that we can use to help. And because we want the holidays to be fun for everybody. Another thing to think about with presents for the pets is sometimes people like to wrap them and let the dog rip them open. Just be careful that they don't eat the wrapping paper, or you don't use any string to wrap it, because we don't want them to get an obstruction just because they were having fun tearing into a toy. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is I was looking on Amazon for something, because, everyone's life is Amazon these days. And they had this featured product called the Furbo dog camera. And I was intrigued because it almost looks like the Alexa. But so it's got this hourglass shape, it's got a camera, and it's got a little hole where it can pop out a treat. And I watched the video, and I hate to disagree with Ellen and Jennifer Lopez, because apparently it's their number one gift for dogs this year. But I think it is a terrible idea. If you want to watch your dog, because it's basically like a baby camera for your dog, but it has a speaker and it can pop out a treat. And when you think about it, you're like, oh, well, I can see my dog when he's not home. I can talk to my dog when I'm not home. I can give him a treat. Those are great things, not from the dog's perspective. So your dog, if it hears your voice, okay, so let's talk about Winston, my dog. For example, we have a baby monitor because I have a toddler, right? So we have a baby monitor, and it has